What's up guys, this is Voxside and welcome to part 2 of creating a help portal in After Effects. So in the first part we've created the main hole opening, and in this part we're gonna be creating this, let's take a look at our final render. So in this part we're gonna be creating this pentagram animation at the beginning before our hole is starting to open. And also we're going to be adding some particles with trapcode particular. And let's get started. And I'm seeing here that I forgot to add the highlights, so the glowing lights around our edges. Let's go ahead in our main comp and let's grab any of these transition main layers, and I will duplicate any of these layers. Let's place them on top here and also unhide them. Alright, so we just have a simple transition layer, and for this guy I'm gonna go ahead and add a stylize and find edges, and I'm gonna set the find edges to invert. And now I can go ahead and add the fractal noise to this layer, and if I set the fractal noise to multiply and increase the contrast here, you can see I'm trying to sort of break out our initial edges with a fractal noise layer, and if I solo this we can see it clearly. And let's just create some contrast over here and maybe go to transform and reduce the scale a bit. And let's also add some animation to the evolution here, so maybe alt and click the stopwatch, and my expression will be time multiplied by, let's try maybe a value of 75. So this just automates some animation for our fractional noise. Let's go ahead now and add the color correction curves effect and increase the contrast even more. And also add a color correction tritone, and let's set the midtones to a, let's use a nice orange, and for our highlights we can use a yellow. Alright, and if I go ahead and let's go to blur and sharpen and add a radial fast blur. Let's set this guy to brightest, and now if I increase the amount you can kind of see the effect we're getting. And let's scroll our timeline a bit. This will be fine maybe. Let's maybe actually just decrease the contrast a bit and try to lower some of these values a bit. And now I can go ahead and add a stylized glow to this. Let's increase the feather here and maybe decrease the threshold, or rather decrease the threshold. And if I unsolo this layer, I can set this layer to be add. Alright, and now you can see these will be our highlights. And you can go ahead and maybe decrease the brightness or just play around with the noise settings to get the effect you're looking for. But this is the main idea behind how to create these nice highlights for our hole. Alright, and now we can go ahead and create our pentagram. So let's go ahead and create a new composition. I will make this 1000 by 1000, and let's name this composition to pentagram. Alright, and let's drop a ellipse shape, so double click the ellipse tool, and with the layer selected I will press U twice to bring out our settings here and just decrease the size a bit, and also get rid of the fill, we won't be needing this. So just try to fill out our composition bounds here with this shape. And now I will go ahead and deselect this layer, and if I go to my shape tools I can switch to my star tool and double click to add our shape, and let's readjust some of the settings here for our polystar. So let's drop the outer radius a bit until it meets with our circle, and let's make this nice and uniform. Alright, and I will use this as a reference to create our new path. So grab your pen tool to create a new path, and now I will just start drawing out my star shape, right? So I'm just going to all of the points that make up this star and finish it over here. And now I can get rid of the initial reference layer, and now I'm only left with the path for this star. And if I press U and select this path 1, I can go ahead and grab my selection tool and readjust these points a bit and make this nice and even and fit inside the circle. Alright, And I will also get rid of the fill for this. And let's see how we can animate this guy now. So let's go to our circle layer, and if I go to my shape options here, my contents, I can go ahead and add a trim paths to this. And inside my trim paths, I will set the end value to be 0, make a keyframe for 0%, and then move over to maybe 3-second mark and set it back to 100. Alright, and this is just creating this circle animation. And maybe I can offset the keyframes a bit. And this will be fine for now. Let's also do the same for this guy. I will add a trim paths to this, go inside my trim paths, and I want to animate the end from 0. So make a keyframe, and let's move over to our 3-second mark, and I will actually set this to a value of 25%. Alright, and I'll show you why in a second. So if I duplicate this layer again, Control D, let's press U twice, I can set the trim paths option for the offset. So the offset in the trim paths I will increase to 90 degrees, and then if I duplicate this guy again, and for this guy I want to set the offset to 180 degrees. And then for my final duplicate, so create a new one, I will set the guy to be 270. Alright, and now what I've essentially done is create this nice variation in the way the star reveals itself, rather than being just a straight line that goes from one point to another. Alright, so it's creating a more interesting effect this way. And I can see that our star is cut here at the top, so I can maybe increase the end amount for this guy to 26%, and this should be fine now. Alright, so this is our animation so far, and let's maybe offset these layers a bit and create some variation between them. And let's see how this looks. Alright, so not bad, and this should be fine for now. Let's actually add a layer, adjustment layer. And for this adjustment layer, I want to add a stylize and roughen edges. Alright, and as I increase the border here, you can see it's creating this nice distortion that will just help make things uneven and give a more natural feel to it. And maybe let's increase the edge sharpness a bit. And let's actually increase the scale for this guy and maybe increase the border. So I'm just trying to create some distortions, and this is more like a handwriting effect. And let's go back in our main comp and let's add our pentagram to our scene. So I will drop my pentagram, I will set this to add, and then I will press F4 and make this a 3D layer, and then I will grab any of the 3D layers that we previously have and copy the transform properties from this guy to our pentagram. So paste the properties here, and you can see it's properly aligned in our scene now. And let's go ahead and check if this is centered with our hole. Alright, so this is looking pretty good. Let's actually just make this smaller, so I will decrease the scale to maybe 80%. And just make sure that our hole is bigger than our pentagram here. This will be fine. And let's rename our adjustment layer with the CC glass and displacement map to let's press enter here, and let's rename this to displacement. And I will actually just hide this layer for now because it only slows down our render, and we will just enable it at the ending when we make our final render. Alright, let's go back here and let's see how we can make this pentagram look cool. And let's start by adding a fractal noise to this. And let's solo this layer for now, and maybe set the brightness, lower the brightness a bit, increase the contrast, and maybe the complexity, lower the complexity to 3. And let's maybe increase the scale for this guy, maybe the brightness, and let's add a tritone effect to this. Let's set the midtones to a nice red. Alright, and we'll leave the highlights to white. Let's see how this looks so far. So not bad. I actually want to set this layer to multiply, so that's much better. And I want to add a fast blur to this and just blur it by maybe 4 pixels, so it's not perfect. It doesn't have these perfect edges, and it will blend better with the footage. Let's actually go ahead and duplicate this pentagram layer, and for my second duplicate I will increase the blur amount to maybe 70, and grab both of these layers, press T for opacity, and maybe set them both to 70. Alright, so this is the effect so far. And I want to actually duplicate this pentagram layer again, set this guy to add, and if I solo this, I can lower the brightness for my contrast here, for my fractal noise rather, maybe increase the contrast and add a stylized glow to this. Maybe lower the threshold and increase the glow radius, and this will be sort of like a highlight layer for my pentagram, and just add a little bit more a bit more detail to this pentagram. Alright, and you can see that it's right on top of our hole, and we need to mask out our pentagrams with the hole alpha. So let's grab this transition main layer, and I will actually duplicate this guy and place this on top here and just get rid of all of these effects. So this was our highlights layer, alright, and we just need a transition layer, and let's duplicate this 2 times, and let's place one above each of our pentagram layers. Alright, and now I will grab all of our pentagram layers and set them to Luma matte for our transition matte, or rather let's set them to Luma inverted matte. Alright, so now it's using that transition alpha to mask out this center piece for our hole. Alright, and now our pentagram is slowly fading as our hole increases. Alright, and we can go ahead now and let's start creating our particles, and let's start with pentagram particles. So let's make a new solid layer, and I will name this to pentagram underscore particles. Alright, and let's add our trapcode particular layer to this. Let's go to emitter and let's set the emitter type to be layer, and for my layer emitter I will set the layer to be any of our pentagram layers, so just choose any of them. And if I solo this layer now, you can see that we are generating some particles. Let's set the velocity and all of these settings to 0 for now and increase the particles per second. And for my layer sampling I will leave this as this, and let's actually use for my RGB usage, set the RGB size vel rotation option over here. Alright, and now if I go to my particles, let's maybe decrease the size to 2, increase the size random and also the opacity random, and maybe go to physics and let's set the gravity to -25. Alright, so this will make our particles fly upwards. This is the effect so far, so not bad. Let's maybe go to my size over life, and I want to use this preset over here for the graph, which will fade out in and out our particles. So not bad. Let's actually stop emitting particles at around the 3-second mark. So I will go ahead and set a keyframe for particles per second. Let's press U for our keyframe information and move over a few frames and set these to 0. Alright, so they will stop emitting at second 3. Or actually I'm just gonna grab these keyframes and move them over a bit, so I want them to stop emitting a bit faster. Alright, so not bad. Let's also go to air settings here in physics, and for turbulence field I will increase the effect position, and let's maybe increase the scale to 15, and I won't be needing evolution speed, so set this to 0. Let's take a look. Alright, and maybe the scale for the turbulence field is too high, so maybe set this to 8. And I think this will be fine. Let's go ahead, and for our color I will set the color to be a red. Let's go with the red here and set the transform mode to add, and also maybe decrease the size to 1, and maybe add a stylized glow to this layer as well, and let's increase the threshold, the radius rather, and decrease the threshold a bit. And let's see how this looks now. So unsolo this layer and I will set the layer to add. And let's make a quick RAM preview and see if we got the right look. Alright, and this is looking fine actually, and this will be our pentagram particles. And let's go ahead and take care of the rest of the particles. So I will disable this layer for now, and let's create our steam particles. So when the hole is opening, I want some smoke to come out of the hole. And I can use the pentagram particles as a base for our new particles. So I will just duplicate this layer. Let's rename this layer to steam. I'll set this layer to be screen. And let's unhide this layer now. And let's go inside our particles per second. And I will disable any animation for this and just increase the particles here a bit. And for our steam layer, I want to set the layer emitter and the layer to be any of the transition main layer. So I'll just pick any of these guys. Alright, and if I solo this layer, you can see that when the hole starts to appear, our particles will appear as well. And for this guy, I'm gonna set the color to be white, and I want the particle type to be cloudlet. And let's increase the size a bit and lower the opacity. And maybe decrease the particles per second here. Alright, so it's starting to look like smoke. And maybe give it a slightly more gravity or less gravity, so negative 35 should do. Actually, let's just go to negative 50. And let's decrease the size random for this guy to maybe 35%. Let's increase the size and lower the opacity to 2 maybe. And let's preview this. Alright, so I also want to stop emitting these particles maybe at around 7 seconds. So I will add a keyframe for particles per second. And let's move over a few frames and set another keyframe for 0. Alright, I also want to go to opacity over life, and for opacity over life I will use this preset over here to the right. And let's maybe unsolo this and let's see how this looks so far. Alright, so this is looking fine, and let's go ahead and use this steam layer to create some embers that are also coming from the pit. Alright, so I will duplicate this guy and let's rename this to embers. And solo this guy, and I will go ahead and just get rid of the particles per second animation here. So I'll just leave this as a constant. Let's try maybe a value of 500. Let's go to our particle type and set this to sphere. Let's maybe set the size to 2 and increase the opacity back to 100%. So this is how it looks so far. And let's go to rendering, motion blur, and let's enable motion blur. And maybe increase the shutter angle here. Alright, and let's go to color and give this a nice orange. And also I will go ahead and add a glow, and let's duplicate this glow, and let's decrease the threshold for this second glow and maybe increase the glow radius. I will set this layer to add, and let's unsolo this. Alright, so maybe a bit too many. Let's maybe set the particles per second to 100. Or maybe 150. Let's maybe set the size to 1.2. So just lower the size a bit. And maybe duplicate this embers layer, just so we get a bit more glow going on. Alright, and this will be my ember particles, and I also want to add a final layer of particles which will also be embers, but I want to generate embers based off of the edge part for our hole. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab the initial pentagram particles, and let's actually hide these other layers. So duplicate the pentagram particles, let's set the duplicate on top, and let's rename this layer to edge embers. And solo this guy for a bit. And for this edge embers layer, I want to add a new layer to the scene, which I will be using to emit our particles. So in our project settings, I will go ahead and grab this pre-comp 1 composition. So if I drop this guy, you can see that it's just the let's just solo this guy. It's just the edges for our hole, and it also has transparency. So this is the composition that we've used in our floor thickness, that we've created the extrusion by duplicating this layer over and over again. So I'm just going to use this layer as a emitter for our edge embers particles. Let's go ahead and press F4 and set this to be a 3D layer. And let's copy the position from any of these other 3D layers. So go ahead and copy the transform and paste it to our layer. So you can see we just simply added a layer for this white edge around our hole. Alright, and I can go ahead and unsolo this and also hide this layer. And now back in our edge embers, let's solo this. In our particular settings, let's set the layer to be our pre-comp that we've just imported. And if I press U for my keyframe information, I can go ahead and get rid of the animation for particles per second and just increase the particles here. Alright, and if I increase the particles even more, now you can see that let's actually just increase the size maybe to 5, and let's set the color to white. So now I'm generating these particles based off of our edges layer. Alright, and I actually want to set the layer sampling for this to be particle birth time. And if let's just increase the particles per second here. So let's take a look and see what we've created. Alright, so not bad. And maybe let's stop emitting particles for this layer at the 7-second mark. So set the keyframe for particles per second, move over a few keyframes and set another keyframe for 0. Alright, and maybe let's increase the gravity to -50. And also decrease the size back to 2, and maybe size random to 50. And maybe let's also add some life random, so maybe a life random of 35%. And if I set the color now to a nice orange, I can also add some motion blur to this. So turn on motion blur and maybe increase the shutter angle. Let's also just increase the turbulence field. And let's go ahead and add a glow. And maybe duplicate the glow. And let's lower the threshold for this guy and increase the radius. And maybe just decrease the size now to 1.2. This will be fine. Let's unsolo this and see how it looks. So this will be the final particle layer that we've added. And I can see here that it's not really properly aligned with our edges. And I can also just grab this pre-comp that's being used to emit our edge ember particles and just offset this guy in time a bit, just so it starts a little bit faster. So now our particles look a bit more aligned with our edges. And let's go ahead now and let's enable all of our particle layers and see what we've got. Alright, so this is pretty much the effect. And you can go ahead and refine the settings for your particles as much as you want, but this will be the general idea and workflow on how to achieve the particles. And as a final thing, let's go ahead and add an adjustment layer, and this will be our final color correction layer. So let's rename this to color correction, and let's go ahead and maybe add a tint. Let's set the tint to maybe 20%, and go ahead and add the curves, and maybe increase the contrast for my curves here. And let's refine some of these settings. Let's maybe go to our red channel and increase the red highlights. And let's go to our blue channel and increase the blue shadows. And maybe decrease the red highlights a bit. Alright, and maybe even go to our green channel and increase the green midtones. And one final thing that I like to do also is add a noise and grain noise. And let's set the noise to maybe 5%. So this will just add a little grain to your final render. And actually I think this is looking pretty fine. And like I said, go ahead and check the original settings from the original project by following the download link in the description of the video. I hope you found some of the techniques useful, and in case you learned anything new, make sure to drop a like, subscribe and stay tuned for more tutorials, and I'm out.